Hey everyone, Professor Reed here. Wanted to make a quick video overview for the cause and effect essay. Now, please make a note of this. This essay is for like my 200 level classes, which the theme for that class is this idea of discourse community. Now, typically we write a series of essays in the class where we try to make the essays all connected or be related to each other. And the idea, I guess, from a academic standpoint is to show the connectivity with research and looking at a subject matter that can be pretty, not so one-dimensional. So for this specific essay, I want to go over some of the ideas for it. So I have is the overview in this. I have a little section on the logical fallacies and the annotation, which are required. I focus on the counter-argument rebuttal for it as well. And then I also have the rubric sort of added in as well. So I think this is pretty comprehensive. My goal is to give you support documents for it, obviously. Now, what you want to do is you want to also check out the example essays that are up on Canvas. And, usually at this time of the semester with the cause and effect essay, we are in the place where we're going to be saying our goodbyes pretty soon. Just being passing strangers there on campus. I would hope that this would be one of those essays that as you move forward, you're going to be really successful as a writer and critical thinker as well in terms of the essay, because, that's the goal of the class. Let me go to the next slide here. Okay, so here's the overview for the essay. Now, there's a little bit of flexibility with this. In certain classes, I have as a 4-page essay. Certain classes have as a little bit bigger. So just double check with me on that just to make sure we have the right one. But one of the things that we do in all my classes, we have something called a portfolio. I should say if I ever use this for a summer class, we typically don't have the portfolio. But basically, you take essay 1, essay 2, essay 3. You make the changes to it. In my 200 level classes, we also make an abstract where you're basically summarizing what the source material is about. So that's always like an exciting thing to do for students. They basically summarize the connectivity and what the research for their paper, for each one of the papers, how they were connected. So it's a really good one. And for this specific essay, we're looking for cause and effect. Now, we wrote papers on a discourse community that you selected. We made the proposal. You did the interviews. That first essay was more informative. Second essay was looking at the variety of different source materials surrounded. We're looking at those epididic, forensic, deliberative sources. And then this one's looking at what are some of the causes and effects. Now, as I mentioned, probably throughout our classes, I usually see that those deliberative sources for essay number 2 are going to start to sort of point us in the direction for the cause and effect essay. Now, here's the thing. You can use some of those sources you do use throughout the semester. Try to make this one, a little bit more on the academic side. However, some of these discourse communities are newish and really don't have as much academic sources in there. But, take a look at the example essays and see how they use them. You just definitely don't want to repeat the same information from essay 2 or 1 in this third essay. That's one of the sort of like downfalls of this essay. Students get a little stressed out this time of year. End of the semester, it can be, a little bit overwhelming for certain students. We want to make sure we keep the momentum going, get this one done, put it in the portfolio, say our goodbyes, and I can grade these things usually over the break and get those done. So this essay should have, a thesis statement that deals with cause and effect. And there's 2 examples there are looking at the anti-vaxxer movement, which they would call a vaccine hesitant movement. And what I try to do in the essay, or in the overview, I said, I break down some examples that I found in the past, okay? All right, good. Now, also keep in mind, you have to do something called annotation for this essay. It's required to annotate 3 sources, which is actually really not that many sources to annotate. That being said, a writing class is trying to set you up for success as writers. I know I tutor as a writing tutor, and I can see that there's a variety of different, essays that professors will assign to write about. It's really, really interesting to see. But I would say my goal as a professor, having you walk into a 200 level class, is that if you go into whatever papers you're going to be writing in the future, APA papers, at a higher level, you're going to be familiar with the concept of a literature review, which we basically did in the presentation for that second essay, and you're going to be familiar also with the concept of annotation, because these are all going to be things that you're going to have to do. Now, you may have done annotation before in the past. I find that students have had really amazing experiences with certain professors across the board, and each professor has their different style and focus, that sort of thing as well. Now, annotation is basically summarizing source material. Now, there's a very specific way that you're going to want to do it if you use APA or MLA. And remember, for this portfolio, I go back and forth with this. I really enjoy the APA formatting, but I can understand how somebody would use the MLA formatting. Just make sure for the portfolio that you keep it all in the same formatting. Some students have mixed those up before. That can be a disastrous situation. Now, what I have here is a set of questions that you can answer to create the annotation. So if you go back on my YouTube page, like and subscribe, obviously, and then make sure that you watch the video on, it's basically looking at how to use Wikipedia, how to use Google Scholar, how to use databases, and then right below it, there's an overview of annotation. But basically, what I've done over the last couple of years is I've used this list of questions here to sort of like use for my annotation. So what you want to do is you want to find 3 sources you're going to use in this paper, cause and effect. It's 4 pages long. You're going to want to read over those papers, obviously, take a few notes on them, and then you're going to want to also summarize the source material. And what I would recommend is using this list of sources here as like a guide for it. In addition, I will post examples of annotation. Okay, and then what you do is you create the works cited entry for the specific source, right? You go to the library database, or you methodically do this on your own, or you use a website like Scrivener, whatever it is. Just triple check it. We'll try to catch that in the conferences as well, because remember, at the end of the semester in the portfolio, you can lose a few points for this, okay? And then you want to put the answers only to those questions at the bottom, right underneath the works cited entry. Okay, so whatever sources you're going to use, you want to use those questions in the previous slide to almost summarize the source material. And I would say a good annotation, probably 5 to 7 sentences. I want to say that's pretty good. And you're going to also want to put annotated bibliography at the top. And then what you would do is you would add another source with the summary below it, and that would create the annotated bibliography. Now, please make a note of this. One of my goals is to have you guys not do a ton of work for my classes. I try to really manage that. I try to be, direct and to the point. Although sometimes it can be a little bit chatty, I guess is the right word. But I would say this. Try your best to get the sources that you're going to use for the essay, because sometimes what students will do is they'll go back and they'll change their sources, and they get up and get in a little bit of trouble because they have to go and redo the sources for the final essay. So yes, the sources that you annotate are going to also be the sources that you use in the essay. Okay. Now, one of the other, per the rubric, gosh, that sounds like a terrible thing to say. Based on the rubric, right? Logical fallacies are required. Now, we have a pretty specific overview of logical fallacy. One of my favorite lectures throughout the semester. Now, I have to give a quick point of reference. In my life, I went to undergraduate at a school called Old Dominion University down in Virginia. Great school, the Monarchs, the whole thing there, right? And I had a professor named Dr. William Brenner, and Dr. William Brenner wrote a whole book on logic, like logic across the board. Amazing guy. And one of the things he's told us is that logical fallacies can blur over a little bit. So per Dr. Brenner, logical fallacies aren't really as siloed as most people make them seem to be. Okay, so theoretically, you could do an ad hominem fallacy that's also a false dichotomy fallacy. We should also stress that the term straw man as a fallacy should be replaced with straw person, because all gender types can definitely make fallacies. We want to definitely be aware of that across the board. But what you want to do now is also refer back to the logical fallacy video that's on my YouTube page. You're going to use at least one of those fallacies, and we'll take a look at an example of this in the video. You're going to use at least one of these logical fallacies in your paper, and most of the time, I'd say 90% of the students use it in the rebuttal for the essay. So take a look at that. And I have ad hominem, composition, post hoc, which is also called false cause, which is also called correlations isn't causation, which is also called post hoc ergo propter hoc, slippery slope, weak analogy, appeal to authority, ad populum, appeal to pity, straw man, and false dichotomy. And one that's really related to composition is called division. Now, watch the videos on that. But as we said in that class lecture, if you find a fallacy that's not on the list, do your absolute best to just triple check it to make sure it's a fallacy. Like, for example, there's one called hasty generalization. There's one called no true Scotsman. There's one called moving the goalpost. Appeal to ignorance. Every semester, students find one or two that they use. Or you can look up like confirmation bias or different types of things. You want to use those in the paper. So find a logical fallacy, weave that in. And here's the thing also to note, when you use a logical fallacy, you get a definition of it, you don't need to have that doesn't count as a source. Okay, now here is the rubric. I try to make my rubric based on the point system, but make sure that the thesis argues a position. It's based on cause and effect. You're almost splitting the essay in half. Make sure you have a collection of academic, non-academic sources. They're all dealing with cause and effects. Make sure the papers are connected to the original paper. The content is understandable. Make sure you have that analysis portion higher in the paper. We're trying to get the analysis portion there. And really and critically, real importantly, you want to make sure you have a counter argument. We're going to go into that, what a counter argument is. It's an objection to your thesis. And then make sure you have the logical fallacy, and that's going to typically happen in the rebuttal. And then make sure you have the citation page, APA, MLA. You want to make sure you have all those elements in the paper to make sure this thing is flowing together. And in particular, what some students will do is they'll add a paraphrase to this one because they're trying to get the highest grade possible for the class, and that shows a high level of engagement. And they do that, but just make sure even with a paraphrase, you let us know where the source material came from. Okay, and make sure you have a thesis statement. Now, this one's going to be cause and effect. Now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to really stress the idea that we want a counter argument which goes against our thesis statement, and then the effect or it can go against either the cause or the effect, and we want to have a rebuttal which goes back to our original thesis statement. So that's one of the things you want to be aware of. You gotta make sure this happens, and you want to try to use some source material for the counter argument or the rebuttal, and we'll look at that. Okay, so what I did was I went back to the Professor Reed archives. I found a paper that was on genetically modified food. Now, the student wrote a really, really good paper on their discourse community was, oh gosh, I want to say it was people that ate raw food, or maybe it was potentially vegans. I can't really remember the exact first paper. Their second paper looked at the idea of genetically modified food. They looked at the sort of the history of it. It was really fascinating. There's a company called Monsanto. I didn't know this, so I read it. Monsanto actually was the first company to sort of copyright. Somebody's going to know the correct legal term. They sort of copywrote the genetic code for certain seeds in America. Real fascinating history. And then what the student did was they wrote their final paper on genetically modified food, and they looked at sort of the marketing of it. Now, the student was a marketing major, I want to say, and they said the cause of a disdain for genetically modified food is its negative image, and the effect is that this brand is preventing its usage for the general public. Okay, so they were sort of arguing that unfortunately genetically modified food gets a bad rap. Now, I've had students in my classes that have looked at that as a conspiracy, genetically modified food, and I've had some students look at organic food as like a form of it. Okay, so this shows sort of the breadth of the paper. It can go in a lot of different ways, and the students did a really good job with all three of these essays. And remember, what you're trying to do for the paper is you're trying to create a counter argument that goes against your main thesis. Okay, so the student would have to argue against this thesis. Okay, so what they did is they had and now here's another thing before we get into the actual paragraph. You want to make sure we as readers know we're going into the counter argument, and really imagine it's like a conversation. It's trying to explain to you like we're talking, right? So whatever you're talking about. Now, we're in the Philadelphia area. Imagine if you had a conversation about, some of the sports teams around here, right? like one of the negatives of the sports teams around here is like, oh, like Eagles fans are so aggressive. Well, if you said you agreed with that, say you're arguing that they aren't that aggressive, right? You would say many people argue that the Philadelphia fan base is over the top, right? So you would sort of introduce that information, and you're pointing out how there's a disagreement. So the counter argument goes into an objection to your thesis. So in that last example we saw, thesis statement is arguing that genetically modified food is a good thing, right? And if we can just get past the image of it, we can really utilize it. And then the writer would have to create a counterargument which goes against that. Okay, and they need to introduce it with a phrase like many people argue it is often misunderstood. So we want to make sure we say, and for the counterargument, we're trying to be very neutral. We're just trying to describe the objection. Okay, because if you think about it in terms of that classic Aristotelian idea, ethos, pathos, and logos, we're trying our best to show that we're aware of the other side. Okay, and here's that example. So I'd pause this. Okay. But you can see here, many people believe that genetically modified foods are filled with chemicals, therefore not good for consumption, according to a recent Pew study. Okay, now that one is in italics because we're just showing off where the actual quote is. Okay, but that's that's a little bit. There's a little bit of a change here. I took this directly from Canvas. And you can see they're just explaining the other side, okay? And I like that closing sentence, these opinions translate into a negative public opinion of the GMO brand, okay? And then, student goes to rebuttal, which is returning back to the main idea of the thesis, and therefore negating the counterargument, if that makes sense. So just imagine like a conversation. You think the Eagle fans are an amazing fan base, you think they have a bad rap. Okay, and the effects of that are people unfairly judging the city of Philadelphia. Okay, so you would say many people. So that would be your core idea, and then you would say many people say that the Eagle fans are overly aggressive, and you would just sort of explain it. Now your rebuttal would return back to the idea that they have a bad reputation, right? So rebuttals are going to be negating the counterargument, and therefore going back to the thesis statement. And what we're going to recommend is that you try to weave in the logical fallacy into the rebuttal. Okay, and what you want to do is also introduce this with what this argument overlooks, why this position is popular, although it's core and it's valid. You could, introduce it. And here it is. Okay, this argument overlooks the potential usage of the GMO foods for greater sustainability. In a report late last year, the American Medical Association, so there's no justification for it. Okay. They actually layered two sources in here. And what's really nice is they use the fallacy of ad populum as relevant to this discussion. In this fallacy, something is deemed good or bad because of the masses approve of it. However, data-driven studies disprove the negative opinions about GMO food and should be the true driving force when making decisions about its usage. Okay, so it goes into an objection to it. So hopefully this video is helpful. Now, what I want to do is keep this under 20 minutes, and dang it, I am at 18.25. So what you want to do is just, watch the video, make sure you feel good about it, email me if you've got any questions about it. I'm here for you. All I want to do is support. This is the final, it's the final essay this semester. I don't want anybody, falling off because of this. Yeah, email me if you got any questions about it. And then also keep in mind that we will review this in class. This will go into the portfolio. And you want to make sure you use the annotated sources in this. You can see here they use the annotated here. They made sure to put the in-text citation, and they wove in that one logical fallacy. So email me if you got any questions, and that's it for me.